Some coasts, particularly where we've got the breeze from the sea, will remain rather fresh. And it's a similar story on Sunday. Plenty of strong sunshine. UV levels will be high, as will grass pollen levels too.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Coming up in the next hour, the government is now in a legal battle with the COVID inquiry. We'll explain to you what that actually means. All the parties now support net zero, but have they really thought about the energy security implications of their policies? We'll debate what to do with those Just Stop Oil protesters who attempted to stop the England cricket team getting to Lord's today. And our last subject on the agenda will be, is it now right to scrap inheritance tax? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. Well, as you've just been hearing, the Cabinet Office is now seeking a legal challenge to the COVID inquiry order to release the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages and diary entries. It was given until 4 p.m. today to hand over those unredacted messages between Mr Johnson and his advisers during the time of the pandemic, as well as his diaries and all his notebooks. The Prime Minister earlier said the government is confident in its position to respond to the COVID inquiry's demand for full disclosure of the private messages and papers. The Cabinet Office previously argued the material was irrelevant and claimed it didn't have to reveal it. Well, also in the news today, Labour has received a formal complaint over the conduct of the MP Geraint Davis. He was suspended by the party pending an investigation into reports of incredibly serious allegations of completely unacceptable behaviour. The Swansea West MP has had the whip removed while a review is carried out. Dorset Police has launched an investigation into the deaths of 2 young swimmers at Bournemouth Beach yesterday. A 12-year-old girl from Buckinghamshire and a 17-year-old boy from Southampton died after being pulled from the sea yesterday afternoon. 8 others were treated for non-threatening injuries. A man in his 40s, who the force say was on the water at the time, has been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. Now, police investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann say they recovered several items during last week's searches of a Portuguese reservoir. German officials say the items can't yet be linked to her disappearance and will be evaluated over the coming weeks. A large section of the reservoir and dam was cordoned off around 30 miles from where the 3-year-old originally went missing 16 years ago. Police say their investigation into the chief suspect in the case, Christian Bruckner, is expected to continue. Now, Just Stop Oil protesters blocked the England cricket team's bus today as it made its way to Lord's. They stood in front of the coach in the middle of the road, preventing the team from getting to the ground on time. Cricketer Johnny Bairstow posted a photograph on social media saying, "If we're a bit late, it's not our fault." They did eventually arrive safely at Lord's, where day 1 of the test match between England and Ireland got underway. Now, the Prince and Princess of Wales have made a surprise visit to Jordan to attend the wedding of the country's Crown Prince. William and Kate are among a host of foreign royalty attending the nuptials of Prince Hussein and his Saudi Arabian bride. The celebrations are being held at the Zahran Palace, the same venue chosen by the Crown Prince's father, King Abdullah II. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The COVID inquiry, and boy, do we need one, given the great damage done to the nation's finances, health and state of mind. But this one, the one headed up by Lady Hallett, the official inquiry, so far has managed to run up a bill, of £114 million. And yet they haven't really interviewed anybody yet. They've just asked for evidence. It will no doubt take years. So I'm pretty sceptical about the way actually we're going about all of this, because, the Swedes have completed their COVID inquiry already. But the argument that's been going back and forth, to and fro, over the course of the last few days is that the COVID inquiry is demanding a lot of documents, and in particular, Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages and his diaries. Now, Boris Johnson says that he's given all the information to the government, to the Cabinet Office, and the deadline that had been set was 4 o'clock today. So the government did hand over a substantial amount of material to the inquiry, but, and this is a letter from the government's legal department, they say the request for unambiguously irrelevant material goes beyond the powers of the inquiry, and they've launched a judicial review into the demands from the inquiry. Now, in a moment, we'll explain to you what that actually means. But do we actually trust the government? You see, Matt Hancock didn't want all of those WhatsApp messages to be released. They were, but they taught us a hell of a lot about Matt Hancock and his attitude towards dealing with the pandemic, which seemed at times to be far more about politics than it did about science. So the government are saying we have not released some of this stuff because it is unambiguously irrelevant. Do you trust the government in what they say? Tell me, Farage at gbnews.com. And I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined today by Sir Robert Buckland MP, Conservative Member of Parliament for South Swindon, but more importantly, former Justice Secretary. Now, I think most folk sitting at home will be scratching their heads, or maybe, please don't turn off, because we're going to explain it.
Yes.
What does the government launching a judicial review. What does it actually mean?
OK, well, the government is saying that, unlike the view of the chair of the inquiry, Lady Hallett, who wants to see all the material that she considers potentially relevant to the issues in the inquiry, that they take the view that a lot of the items are just irrelevant. They're going to be of no help to anybody whatsoever. And more than that, they potentially create a chilling effect. Remember that phrase from way back, the chilling effect, on the way that ministers and officials might work in future. In other words, is there a safe space for ministers and civil servants to get on with their job, to be frank with each other, but in a way that can avoid, frankly, further, sort of a retreat further into the undergrowth if all this material is now going to be capable of disclosure in this way. That's what this argument is about, it seems to me. The government don't want to comply with the decision of the judge. Her decision, though, as chair of the inquiry under the Act of Parliament that creates inquiries, is absolutely exclusive. It's her discretion, her decision. The only way they can challenge it is by asking another judge to look at it to see whether or not it is unreasonable. It's so unreasonable as to be clearly wrong. Now, that seems to be a high hurdle to cross, and I do hope that instead of this turf war, we get a solution as soon as possible, because, as you said at the top of the package, we need to get on with this.
Well, isn't that the problem? That the very act of the government doing this, in effect, kicks the can further down the road, and judicial review is not going to be next Thursday, is it? It's going to be some months down the road. But here's my real question to you, Robert Buckland. I mean, whilst I understand, and I do understand, why the first lockdown came in, we'd seen horrendous scenes from Milano, we'd no idea what was coming.
Absolutely right.
We had historical fear of 1919, the so-called Spanish flu. Well, I got to tell you, after that, I was deeply sceptical about what the government was doing. And interestingly, people like Professor Carol Sikora, who were warning and saying, actually, these successive lockdowns will cause greater physical and mental harm to the nation than the virus ever can. At no point has anybody in government apologised to us, apologised for taking away our liberties in a way that has never happened before in the history of this country, apologised for adding huge amounts to the national debt, much of it, or too much of it, swallowed up in fraud. At no point has anybody apologised for the tens of thousands of people who were undiagnosed with cancer. I mean, you see where I'm coming from on this.
I do.
There is considerable... No, by the way, it wasn't easy for any governing party in any country.
That's the point.
And I will put that in mitigation. But nobody has apologised to us at any point. And I just wonder whether people sitting at home, listening to this in the car, I just wonder whether they don't say to themselves, surely the decision as to what is unambiguously irrelevant should be a decision taken by Lady Hallett and not by a government that, let's be frank, has a vested interest in protecting its reputation.
Well, my view is that I think it'd be far better to leave it to Lady Hallett to be the ultimate arbiter. That's what the law says. She's independent of government. She's been put in that position because of her reputation as an excellent judge and as a lawyer of standing. I think we should be trusting her to make these decisions. And I'm sorry to see that we've got to a position where a legal challenge is being launched.
So you regret the government's action?
Well, I can't speak for them, but I would have sought...
I didn't ask you to.
I would have sought a compromise here. Surely there must be a better way of dealing with this information, to hand it over, to allow independent lawyers to redact it, to edit it, to make sure that relevant items are before the inquiry, and that then when the inquiry publishes its findings, we all can see what is clearly relevant, and that decision's being made by an independent person. I regret hugely that we've ended up in this turf war, which I think is unnecessary.
I suppose one thing you could say is, given the ongoing battle between the civil service and the government, which, I find it extraordinary that civil servants now do not want to carry out government policy from an elected government with a clear majority, and, we'll debate that another day, perhaps. But maybe there's a fear that if a lot of information is given to Lady Hallett that is deeply personal to Boris Johnson, which clearly some of this will be, the fear of it leaking.
Well, that is a very serious matter for the inquiry's own discipline and their own ability to handle the evidence. And I think that would undermine confidence and trust in the inquiry if there were such leaks to happen. So I would have thought they'd be on their guard not to allow that to happen. But I mean, as I gather, as I see from Boris Johnson's team in the last few days, he's saying, look, hand it all over. You know, they can make a decision as to what's relevant or not. I'm more than happy for my papers and my diary to go over. Now, I think that's probably the best course here.
Yeah,
I think
most people are going to conclude that the government, rightly or wrongly, fairly or unfairly, this looks shifty. This looks slippery. And it's how things look, isn't it, in politics?
It is. I mean, to be fair, they will have had legal advice about this, I have no doubt. Now, as a former law officer myself, I know that legal advice would be sought, would be obtained, it would have to take, it would be considered carefully.
What lawyer ever tells you not to take action?
Well, I've been a government lawyer for a long time, Nigel. I know that it's important to protect the space within which government operates. If we do end up in a situation where everything you do and say is potentially disclosable to a third party, you're going to drive it all underground. We're going to have, semaphore code? You know, we need to know for the future. You know, when we look back at the history of this time, we need a record of who made what decision, when, and in what circumstances. The danger with all of this now is that, you know, our future generations are going to look back and say, well, how the hell did they come to these decisions? We don't know. We've got no paper trail.
It's not minuted and it's not... Yeah,
exactly.
No, I buy that. I buy that point. But do you... I mean, come on, you know, you were there.
Yeah.
We do... I mean, we are owed an apology, aren't we?
Nigel, I think that it's far better that we acknowledge the fact that no government is perfect. I certainly don't sit here and say we got all the calls right. I'm sure that in the light of hindsight, there are calls we would have made differently. And I don't think any of us sitting around that table wanted to lock the country up. I can remember thinking, my God, you know, this in a peacetime democracy, a liberal democracy like Britain, we're really going to do this? And I think all of us had that collective...
But we kept on doing it.
Well... We did it.
We kept on doing it.
On the basis of the information we had. You know, I'm a great believer.
Now, you're telling me we followed the science, but...
Well, I didn't use that phrase. I never liked that phrase. I never liked that phrase, that slavish sort of... follow the evidence, yes, and on balance, try and make the best decision in the circumstances. You know, I've made thousands of decisions as a minister, Nigel. I wouldn't say they were all the best or the most perfect decisions.
Sure.
But I made decisions in the circumstances on the evidence that I had at the time, in good faith. And that's as much as you can expect from any minister.
What the Matt Hancock leaks, and we might deplore the manner in which all of Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages came into the public domain. But they did. And the most damning thing in that was he was making decisions, or urging decisions, that certainly weren't following the science. And I'm talking here in particular about quarantine periods for people who've been abroad, and they thought by the way that I'd gone into the open after 13 days and 12 hours, and could they lock me up? Well, I'm irrelevant to this. It's quite funny, but I have got Pub Hooligan now as my Twitter handle. But actually what was happening here, he was wanting decisions to be made to protect the government's reputation rather than dealing actually with genuine health risks from COVID. And it's all there in black and white, and it's frankly why he has to leave politics. There is no way back. Having seen the way Hancock behaved and the decisions he made, some of which were based purely for selfish, political, reputational reasons, why the hell should I trust this government?
Well, look, individuals will be motivated by different things. And I don't think it's fair to say, therefore, the collective view of the government was that we were trying to sort of, you know, slip and slide our way through this because of political expediency. I can tell you, none of this was politically expedient. I mean, the idea that we wanted to lock up the country, you know, stop the economy and end up having to subsidise, you know, jobs and livelihoods was clearly bonkers. I mean, we didn't want to do any of this.
No, but that was then and this is now. And my point is... I'll repeat the point, that what those Hancock revelations showed us is that things were being done to protect his political reputation. You know, even when Whitty and Vallance are saying 5 days or 7 days is fine, no, we must stick to 14 because I've said it already. I mean, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. And my question was not about the difficulty of decisions that government faced at the time, but this looks like a cover-up. It looks like it.
It might do. I think to give the government absolute fair airtime, I don't think it is. I think it's traditional caution by lawyers and others in government who don't want to set difficult precedents for the future. I get all of that. But in the light of this particular inquiry, its central importance, the issues that it's dealing with, all the issues that you've mentioned, I think it is as plain as a pikestaff, or should be, to anybody in government, that the need to cooperate as early and as swiftly as possible and as openly as possible is essential if we are to avoid either the perception of cover-up or indeed the reality. Bearing in mind, all the things that we know now, then I think it is incumbent upon government to cooperate in the fullest possible way with Lady Hallett and her team and to reach a compromise on these issues, which I'm sure is possible.
Pretty clear where you stand, Sir Robert Buckland. Thank you for joining us. And don't say at home that we do not here at GB News give you all sides of the argument, because we have. And do you understand why? After seeing what Hancock said, I find it very difficult to trust them. You know what, in life, if you've got things wrong and made bad decisions, the best thing is to hold your hands up and apologise, something this government appears not to be able to do. Now, net zero is all the rage. Yes, all the parties of Westminster support it. It's just a question of how quickly we can get there. But have they really made proper contingency planning for our energy security? Or if a Labour government gets in, do we find ourselves even more dependent on not just overseas energy, but perhaps regimes who we wouldn't normally like to support? Clive Moffat, our energy guru, joins me to debate that in just a moment.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programmes sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So I asked you, do you trust the government on this? Some of your responses. Nick says, I don't trust this government as far as I could throw them. They've lied and taken people's votes for granted. If the Conservative Party doesn't realise that its reputation is well and truly in tatters, they might as well. They might after the next election. John says, obviously not, or any other government. Gordon says, anyone trusting government is naive at best. And this is one of the things, really, that's happening at the moment, is our trust in government. I think it's the lowest it's been, really right back to the 1970s. Now, the energy debate has rather disappeared from our front pages. The sun is shining, the temperature is rising, the price of gas is not alarming people particularly, and we're told our household bills will come down to manageable levels. Well, Clive Moffat, former government energy advisor and somebody that talks about energy and energy security, has been pretty busy over the last couple of weeks behind the scenes, talking to members of Parliament, talking to National Grid. And Clive, there is a consensus view now. It's there. There's almost no dispute, really, a few MPs here and there. But basically, it's the rush to net zero. Labour, by the looks of what Keir Starmer has said, going to stop all future North Sea gas and oil development. Going to quadruple, or at least quadruple the number of wind farms, onshore, offshore, etc. What have you been saying to these MPs over the last few weeks?
What I've been saying is that there's a need for balance. And I think the time has come, people are beginning to realise that there's a huge cost involved in this. And there's a huge amount of disruption involved in this. And that there are technical reasons, as well as there being overriding cost implications of going forward, as they are promising. We've got a situation at the moment where politicians from both parties are playing politics in the dark on this issue of net zero. Basically, we're making promises like closing down gas on the electricity system by 2030 or 2035, by basically quadrupling, as you say, on wind farms, increasing nuclear reactors, basically, and all of that is coming out as promises that we will do this. But there's no cost-benefit analysis. And what I'm finding interesting, people I'm talking to who have been in the industry as long as I have, is they say there is no cost-benefit analysis being done. We haven't seen a proper full assessment of all of this put together. So we're in a situation where we've got a lot of these issues are uncertain, and there's no balance involved. There's no idea about how we're going to underpin security in this so-called transition, which could take a long time.
Yes, I mean, the talk of nuclear, fine, expensive, but, these small energy reactors, but that's 10 years away, 12 years away. We know that wind, when it works perfectly, is great, but very often, because of its intermittency, there is a major problem. And the Labour proposals. I mean, all of this leaves us ever more dependent, does it not, on imports to stop the lights going out?
Yeah. I think we've got an interesting situation as well. Just like to add is that in the process, what's happened is rather interesting. Since we last spoke, Grid and Ofgem have come out of the, well, I won't say they come out of the closet as such, but they actually come out and said, we have got problems with this. And this is the first time that they've openly admitted. Ofgem have come out and said there isn't going to be enough battery storage power to counter intermittency on wind.
Right.
And Grid have come out and said it's going to cost billions. Pettigrew has gone public and said upgrading the grid to take gas out of the electricity system altogether will cost billions. In fact, there's a report going around, I heard on the grapevine, done by grid engineers, which say that the overall cost of upgrading the network for net zero could be £3 trillion.
What?
Which is £110,000 per household, which is bigger than the total size of the UK national debt.
But if this is being discussed, and if National Grid and the energy regulator are openly talking about these things, why, apart from this programme, is no one talking about it?
Well, on the political side, the message I'm getting back from MPs from both sides is that Labour is saying we adamantly support what we're saying and we're going to take drastic action to implement net zero. On the Conservative side, you get ambivalence. There is a group of MPs there who say, well, maybe we should just hold back. We should think about the scale of this. We should look at the costs and be a bit more balanced in our approach. As one MP said to me, put energy policy on a realistic footing. But there is still a fear that if they do anything that could be construed as backtracking on the 2050 target, that they would basically lose political votes in what is coming up in a year's time in the general election. I have said to APPG members that I think my view is that voters would welcome a view which said we need to take 3 or 4 measures, and I'll tell you what they are now. There are 5 measures I want to take, which are relatively straightforward, which would be an investment in underpinning security and affordability. Gas and power and the economy are inextricably linked, and they're going to continue to be so for the foreseeable future. We basically need to review the windfall tax. We need to get more gas and oil out of the North Sea, reduce our dependency on imports. We need to increase our storage levels, which I've said before many times. We need to, that takes time, that takes 5 years to build. We need to actually, in the meantime, put in place a formal system for industrial voluntarily curtailing demand at times of system stress, which will put the operator in responsibility for real-time management. When I mentioned this to Grid, they said, we'd be happy to do that, but no politicians ever told us to do it. And the other thing is we need to stop, on the gas side, we need to stop the deadline on the boilers, on heat pumps, because basically it's not going to happen. And I think as a general principle, consumers, Nigel, should be allowed to choose if and when they want to adapt, and if they can afford to adapt, to the electrification of both heat and transport.
That is one of the most comprehensive and powerful arguments I've ever heard as to what we need to do against this delusion, and it is a complete delusion that has swept our political class. As you say, no cost-benefit analysis, potential costs, eye-watering potential costs of moving the whole of Grid over. And there's an open invitation here. If anybody at any level of authority in the Labour, Conservative, or indeed Liberal Democrat parties wants to come on this programme and argue against the 5 big points that Clive Moffat has made, please do. There's an open-door invitation any time you want to come. Clive, I'm horrified that this stuff is not being more openly debated, and you coming on tonight helps with that process. We're going to make sure, we're going to start writing letters and asking.
Just to let you know, one little number that might be interesting to viewers is that the cost of balancing the market in electricity, because we're so short of flexible insurance, we don't have enough insurable capacity and support, has got to a point where we're importing, say, electricity from Belgium with £1,000 a megawatt hour, and the cost of that balancing process in the short term is now nearly 30% of the wholesale electricity price and will continue to rise. Steps have to be taken. You cannot allow a grid in a country as important, as an economy as big as this, to go on air and say, we think that involuntary blackouts or voluntary blackouts should be a norm during a cold winter.
The whole thing is beyond belief. Clive, brilliant. Thank you for coming in. And you've certainly re-energised me to start talking a bit more again about energy. I promise you have.
Even though the sun's shining.
Even though the sun's shining, and even though, right at the minute, the price of natural gas is back to sane-ish levels. Well, I was on my way to Lord's this morning, and I was starting to get worried because Johnny Bairstow, the England wicketkeeper for this Test match, tweeted that Just Stop Oil protesters were walking slowly down the road in front of the England team coach, and they were there all on board, and Johnny Bairstow said, if play starts late, don't blame us. Why, oh why, are the police not using their powers to stop this from going on the King's Highway? We'll debate all of that in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Well, last night we had a debate on this programme between Richard Pittman, the former jump jockey and BBC TV commentator on horse racing, and a representative of Animal Rising. And Nathan, the representative, told us why they would disrupt the Derby this Saturday and why ultimately their aim was to stop us having pet dogs and cats. Today, another group called Just Stop Oil, but frankly they're all the same people, did their best to stop the England cricket team from getting to Lord's for the first Test match of the summer. And they walk slowly in the road, and those watching on telly can see Johnny Bairstow's tweet saying, if we're a bit late, don't blame us. And there they are, willfully walking in front of the England coach. Now, we've seen in recent weeks people, builders, workers, physically manhandling these people out of the way, and then they themselves facing the risk of some kind of prosecution. What, in goodness names, are the police doing there, outnumbering the protesters, standing around them? What the hell is going on? I wonder. I'm going to ask David Hay, who's a human rights lawyer and himself a great sporting fan. David, these people have disrupted horse races, rugby games, an attempt here at cricket. I mean, there appears to be no end to the measures they will take or the amount of people's lives they will disrupt by walking slowly down the streets or other groups, you know, chaining themselves to gantries on the M25 or the QE2 bridge. So the question, David, I've got for you as a human rights lawyer to begin is, do the police have the necessary legislation in place to remove these people from being the obstruction to the lives of ordinary folk that they are?
I mean, good evening, Nigel. I mean, the short answer to that is yes. We've already seen the police in other cases. You mentioned, I think, the Dartford and actually arrest and people in them to have sentences passed. So the legislation is there. The problem really started with the legislation itself. I mean, the politicians, the legislation was badly drafted and ill-considered, I would say. And, that's already seen the Conservative issue kind of last-minute statement saying they have to amend it, even though it's just gone through. So you've got a problem already with the legislation. The police, obviously, on the ground have to interpret that. And again, that's where you get a problem, because there's inconsistent interpretation of that and putting the Public Order Act into place. So you'll have some police arresting people that shouldn't have been arrested and not arresting others that should have been. And that's individual police on the day.
I mean, look, the police were criticised for what they did at the coronation. But, actually, being a police force, taking criticism actually is part of the job. I'm afraid if you're in the police, you're going to get stick. Not everybody's going to agree with your actions. But what are they scared of when it comes to removing these protesters? And I just wonder, talking to you as a human rights lawyer, with me being a bit more of a sceptic about the whole area of human rights, could it be the police are worried that if they really take action, they might get taken to a court somewhere in Strasbourg because people will say their human rights have been infringed?
Well, I think you potentially hit the nail on the head on one of the things there. I think, first of all, you've got individual police officers looking at their colleagues that have appeared on social media, they're appearing on news, either arresting or not arresting protesters. They will be fearing that as individual police officers making those decisions. But I think also, because this isn't effectively, changes a new legislation, and already there's many protest groups have said there's issues with the Human Rights Act here, you are going to have the forces looking at this and thinking, well, it's new legislation, it's untested. Do we want to do this? It's clear a lot of these protest groups now are very well funded, and there will be cases going through. So I imagine they're a bit very concerned about their own, looking bad themselves, but also in terms of cases under human rights being taken against them. And you're right. I mean, that's not what the police, one would imagine, should be looking at. They should be, protecting public order and also the rights of the people. And I won't make myself popular with other human rights lawyers saying this, but with the rights of the people that are going about their daily business. And I think there's not enough consideration to that, and that needs to be looked at as well. But I think it's going to continue. You've got a summer of protests.
Yeah, I'm afraid we have. David, thank you for coming on and giving us both sides of this argument from a legal perspective. I have to tell you, my patience with these people has run out completely and utterly. And up in Manchester, 4 local councillors, here's the What the Farage moment, decided they would take the knee. One of them also raising his fist in a black power salute. Yes, they're Labour councillors from Salford, and they're there because of the 3rd anniversary of the death of George Floyd. Now, taking the knee was of course, inextricably linked with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that and the raised fist are pretty inappropriate now, because Black Lives Matter has been utterly discredited. It's pretty much stopped acting as an organisation. But it's OK, because Patrice Cullors, who founded Black Lives Matter, that now totally discredited, extreme left-wing Marxist organisation, it's OK because she's living in a $6 million mansion on the West Coast, so it's all worked out really rather nicely. In a moment, inheritance tax, as 50 Tory MPs demand for it to end, and the Daily Telegraph launches a campaign. Is it right that we should now consider getting rid of inheritance tax? All of that in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Inheritance tax. It was something that George Osborne, in the run-up to the 2010 general election that the Conservatives won, promised that they would lift the levels significantly 13 years on. The levels at which inheritance tax is paid have been completely frozen, and therefore, of course, because of inflation, effectively, the levels at which people pay inheritance tax have come down, and the government's income from this, by many hated tax, has gone up significantly to over £7 billion a year. I've got to tell you, I campaigned on this in 2015. It was part of the UKIP manifesto. And every year or two, we get a group of MPs that come out and say that actually this tax is iniquitous and it's wrong because, after all, the people who are dying and leaving money to their children or grandchildren have already paid tax on that money. It's the net money that they're now being taxed on again. But it is mired in confusion. And one of the biggest confusions is people think, and some of the left-wing press would make you think, that it's just the super rich that pay inheritance tax. The truth is, the super rich have good tax accountants. The super rich do tax planning. The super rich don't pay inheritance tax. It falls on ordinary folk, often when they least suspect it's going to happen. And we're going to start off tonight with this debate with a test case. And I'm joined by Mike Yardley, writer, historian and friend of this programme. Mike, tell us your experience of inheritance tax, please.
Well, it is an iniquitous tax in many ways, and it comes when you're really least prepared to deal with these things, when you're dealing with bereavement. In my own case, unfortunately, I had a very bad reaction to the AstraZeneca vaccine, and so I was feeling grim as well. And our family, like many other ordinary families, took a colossal hit. Now, when you look around, the UK and Ireland seem to have the highest inheritance tax rates in the world, more or less now. China, India, Russia, New Zealand, Australia, they all don't have it anymore. And it is, as you say, ordinary families, let's be blunt, it's particularly middle-class families that are hit by this, because, of course, the super rich, they're sitting on their islands or they have their offshore accounts or whatever.
Mike, what exactly happened in your situation?
Well, I'd rather not get too personal about it, other than to say that we took a big hit. And what is worrying with all of this is that when you look at the average person now, they're probably paying something like 70% overall in direct and indirect taxation. Our rates of taxation overall are colossal. And the other thing that I think a lot of people like me are a little bit unhappy about is that the royal family don't pay any inheritance tax. We don't quite know how much the Queen's private assets were, but they probably were approaching £2 billion. And, you know, because they're very rich people and they'd actually done a special deal with John Major, they don't pay inheritance tax. Meantime, I think another point is the sheer waste of money, because, all right, if our inheritance tax that we're paying to the government was going to be spent well, if it wasn't just going into this black hole of bureaucracy, if, for example, perhaps a reduced rate of inheritance tax was going into a sovereign wealth fund to benefit young people, I mean, that would be a much better system.
I think the problem is, Mike, that's the same for all tax. It just gets it all. Yeah, we don't have hypothecation of tax as it's known. Mike, thank you for joining me on the programme.
Thank you.
Elliot Keck joins me, investigation campaign manager for the Taxpayers Alliance. So, Elliot, basically, the allowance is £325,000 for the individual, after which, once they've died, their estate, you pay 40% tax. But there is an add-on of nearly 200 grand if it's a primary house that is being left either to children or grandchildren. Nieces, nephews, others don't count. But, of course, if it's a married couple, you know, one spouse dies, but actually his or her allowance. So, actually, the argument that many will give as to why the tax is reasonable is actually, you know, the surviving parent dies, up to £1 million can go without tax. That's the argument you're going to get against this campaign that's been relaunched by 50 MPs, with the Telegraph newspaper getting strongly behind it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason why there are so many of these exemptions is because of actually how cruel inheritance tax can be. It's a tax that's unfair, distortionary and deeply unpopular. And it's the unpopularity that is absolutely stunning when you look at the statistics. The Treasury made a big thing today in their comment to the Telegraph about how only around 7% of estates will pay inheritance tax, and yet 50% of the British public think this tax is unfair. This is a tax that a lot of those 50% of people will never, ever have to pay it, and yet they still look at this and they think these are people that have saved up all their lives, that have paid tax on every single pound that they've earned, every single pound that they've spent, and yet having accrued that wealth, having worked hard, they're suddenly going to lose half of anything over, you know, a relatively arbitrary amount.
Obviously, the house is very often the primary asset that people leave when they die, but there are many other things too that come into consideration, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly, and there's so many different exemptions. So, you know, you can give your money away, but as long as you don't die within 7 years. There's a really, really interesting and bizarre exemption that I think you'll quite like. If you give money to a political party, then that is exempt from inheritance tax. But that political party has to have at least one seat and over 150,000 votes. That means that if you give money to Plaid Cymru, that will be exempt from inheritance tax. But if you give money to the Brexit Party, which had 4 times as many votes as a Plaid Cymru, that won't be exempt.
I've lived through
all of this. So you have all of these utterly bizarre exemptions that people can fiddle in order to try and reduce what is a very cruel and unfair burden.
Yeah, I think there is a perception that people have paid that money already. They shouldn't pay it again. The super rich get out of it anyway because they have effective tax planning. But let's be honest, Elliot. These 50 MPs... they're the same 50 MPs that argue for free markets. They're the same 50 MPs that argue that Brexit's being wrecked and not being done properly. They're the same 50 MPs that say that open door mass immigration on the level it is not doing the country much good. But with the way the Conservative Party has gone, they're very much in a minority.
Well, they seem to be in a minority at the moment, but, you know, this is one of those genuine taxes where actually it's unbelievably unfair. This is not a tax where I'm coming on this show to say it's bad for the economy, and I hope people realise this. But actually, you look at the opinion polls, and you know maybe they point one way. You could point to something like a windfall tax, where you know maybe there is actually a residual popularity despite the negative impact it has. This is a tax that even that people don't pay realise just how unfair it is.
What are the political chances of? And by the way, I'd get rid of it. It's complicated. It actually drags in, particularly in Greater London and the South, it drags in all sorts of people that certainly aren't rich by any you know, real definition of that.
Yeah, 40% of houses last year would qualify for inheritance tax.
I mean, you know, absolutely.
Yeah.
But politically, this isn't going to happen, is it?
Well, I don't know about that. The Conservatives are going to have to try and do something to win the next election, and bringing that historic tax burden down is one way to do it. And, when you've got a tax that is so deeply unfair, you never know. It's been a vote winner in the past. It's the reason why Gordon Brown didn't go to an election in 2007. It was a big, big play for the Conservatives in 2010, even if they didn't really implement it. So, it's a proven vote winner in the past.
I don't know about didn't really implement it. Yet another promise they made that they didn't actually keep. Let's see. It would be popular. I don't believe they're going to do it. But the great thing, Elliot, Keck, about people is, as young as you, is you've still got your optimism.
Well, exactly.
You get a bit
that's all we've got now.
You get a bit more cynical. Yeah. Thank you. But it's, as I say, it's an old campaign. I very much hope the campaign succeeds. I doubt very much that it will. We've got time for a couple of quick barrage to Farages. We're going to start with Robert in Bradford.
Hi, Nigel. I'm Robert. What would you do to make the cost of living lower for these people to live a normal life?
Well, look, I think it's a very fair question, Robert, the cost of living. And it really is a serious crisis for a lot of people, food, etc. Two quick things I'd say. Number one, on food, if we got on with what Brexit was meant to do and did trade deals with other parts of the world, we could actually reduce the price of many foodstuffs. And secondly, energy. We had Clive Moffat in earlier on today telling us about the huge cost that net zero is going to go on putting on people's energy bills. For quite what, I'm not sure. I've got time for one more. Let's take one from Jade from Bradford.
Hi Nigel, I'm Jade. I'm just wondering how people get on the property ladder with the prices of the rent, and it's way too expensive to be able to afford when I don't work and the money I get, we're just surviving. So I'm just wondering if you've got any advice.
Jade, I'm really sorry to say that there are no easy answers to this. We've got a massive crisis here. Demand and supply dictate prices in markets. They kind of always have, and I think they probably always will, despite what some government ministers may think. And we have an exploding population, and we're not even building enough houses for people coming into the country every year, let alone, Jade, for people of your generation. It is a major, major problem. We have to, through border control, stabilise this massive rise in our population. And we're going to have to start building. And I think new towns, post-war style new towns may be the answer. I don't think just putting a couple of hundred houses in this village or that village works, because you haven't got the infrastructure to go with it. I think when you plan a new town, you can do it. But Jade, it's a massive question. Probably one of the biggest problems challenges being faced by your generation is that they can't do, in many cases, what their parents and grandparents actually took for granted. It'll become a very big political issue in this country. I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. He and I have both been at the cricket today, but don't tell the bosses at GB News whatever you do. Jacob, did you have a good day?
Excellent day, wasn't it? It was
Yes.
good for England, which is what we like to see. And they were scoring at 6 runs and over in our innings, which was really exciting to watch.
Exciting.
What you need in Test cricket.
But no, absolutely. I mean, I loved it. Jacob, what have you got coming up tonight?
I've got Pat Pocock on to talk about the cricket.
Yep.
But before that, this ridiculous COVID inquiry. Other countries have finished theirs.
Yes.
We've hardly started. And what we need to find out is, were the restrictions necessary? What should we do next time? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? And what we're now obsessed with is gossip about ministers' WhatsApps. This is just so trivial, and we've got to be serious.
And a bit of politics, because Boris Johnson in the last hour has issued a statement. Boris Johnson has said he's more than happy to hand over all the unredacted WhatsApp messages and notebooks to the inquiry. So he's clarifying his position that he's happy for it all to be given over, but it's the government that haven't done it. And Jacob, they look shifty.
Hold the presses, but I actually think the government's right.
Do you?
Yes, that I've looked at the Act.
Good Lord.
And the Act provides for the inquiry to ask for relevant information.
Yeah.
It's not a great fishing expedition for the judge to find out what people have sent messages to each other about, saying,
OK, well,
we think Nigel Farage is brilliant, and things like that. They were like sending it to each other.
Robert Buckland was more sceptical, but hey, there we are. Let's have a look at the all-important weather. I guarantee you, northeasterly winds and dry.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Today marks the start of meteorological summer, and for many, the sun will continue to shine. It should be a brighter day tomorrow across parts of eastern England compared to today. The weather's set fair thanks to this big area of high pressure. Around that high, the breeze is still feeding in from the North Sea, and that moves the cloud back inland during this evening and overnight, so turning overcast across most of England into parts of East Wales, southern Scotland as well. Extreme west, Northern Ireland, and a good chunk of Scotland will stay largely clear. And here it will turn quite chilly. Northern Scotland, even a touch of frost is possible, but most will start Friday at about 8 or 9 Celsius, but also starting fairly cloudy. Now, I think that cloud will break up as we go through Friday morning, reasonably quickly as well, and I'm more optimistic that eastern counties of England, where it has been dull and cold all week, will be a little bit brighter. There will still be a breeze, bringing a chilly feel from the North Sea, so pretty fresh on the coast, but a sunnier day generally. Most places seeing sunny spells. Again, west will see the highest temperatures, 20, 21, maybe 22 Celsius. A bit more cloud at times across the northwest of Scotland. That cloud thickening up here again on Friday night. A little bit of drizzle likely over the Northern Isles, and again, some cloud will seep back inland over central parts of England. But on Saturday also, although it may start a bit misty in these central areas, that low cloud should disappear and should be gone by late morning, I'd have thought. So for most, it's a sunny Saturday. Again, a bit more cloud over northern Scotland, but generally elsewhere, lots of blue sky. Again, it'll be western areas seeing the top temperatures, 23, maybe a 24 on Saturday. Some coasts, particularly where we've got the breeze from the sea, will remain rather fresh. And it's a similar story on Sunday. Plenty of strong sunshine. UV levels will be high, as will grass pollen levels too.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance.